and welcome Glenna Crooks, who has a book coming out shortly, SeniorSage, Building Networks to Support Today's Longevity Pioneers. I love that title, Glenna. And I love this topic, and it's ironic that the topic is building your network because the two of us were connected this year through our network, and it's been just amazing. And we both introduced each other to a lot of other people that have really helped. And I think most of us think about networking in that regard, like for your job, as your profession. But really, one of the things that comes up on a lot of our discussions is I, I've got to help my dad build his network because mom's not around anymore and he needs support. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And you've got some really cool technology that I actually played a part in that I hope you talk about as well to help people sort of quantify and understand their network and grow it.
That's right, Steve. And actually, I had not intended to tell a story about a widowed gentleman, but if I don't, by the end of this presentation, perhaps in the Q&A afterwards, you can go back and ask me about that.
Okay, great. And now, for those of you who've never tuned into one of our discussions, we have a lot of different formats. Sometimes it's just a conversation, sometimes it's a presentation, and questions are thrown in. Glenna and I huddled. Her information is so unique and it's so interesting. What we're going to do today is Glenna is going to present, and then we're going to do the Q&A at the end. But I don't want that to slow you down to asking questions. You can ask questions at any point in the discussion. So just type them in there in the Q&A box and we'll make sure to get to it. Sound good, Glenna?
Perfect. And Steve, I never tire of talking about this subject. So even after today, if people want to reach out and chat about this some more, I am very open to that.
I love it. So I'm going to drop behind the curtain here and turn the reins over to you, and just feel free to shout out. I know I've got some.
So are you seeing my slides, Steve? Steve, you're on mute.
Yes, I see your slides. They look great.
All right, so
And
we're
then,
ready to rock and roll.
and then just let me know when you want me to drop those citations in.
Yes, yes, I will. Well, thank you, everyone. It is really a great time for me today to be talking to you about networks. This has become my passion. Now, before I really get started, though, I need to tell you a bit about the origin story, because if you understand the origin story, then the rest of this is going to really make some sense. All of this started for me in 2007. I was working on a challenge that my clients presented me, which was that life was too tough for them as executives. Many of them were thinking about quitting. Now, I understood what it was to be overwhelmed. I went looking for solutions, and then I saw a quote from Robert Downey Jr. in a fashion magazine. Now, I wouldn't have noticed this except that I had just seen the trailer for the first Iron Man, and I happen to be a big fan of action flicks and superheroes. So when he said in this interview that he needed a a pit crew, because after all, he wasn't a Model T, he was a Ferrari, and it takes more of a pit crew to help them stay on the road, I thought to myself, I was in a pretty snarky mood, I think, you know what? If you're a Ferrari, I'm at least a Maserati, but you're right, it takes a pit crew. Who's mine? And how are they doing? And then after a while, I realized, uh-oh, I'm on other people's pit crews. How am I doing? So that set me off on a process to understand. Now, what you see there on the left is how I started. I put a blank piece of paper on the kitchen counter and I kept track of everybody in my life. Now, I was not looking at my business life at the time. I was a business owner. I was really looking at everything else in my life. When I finished, there were 137 people on the list. Now, I forgot some of them, by the way. It wasn't winter, so I forgot about the guy who plows the driveway, and it wasn't tax season, so I forgot about my accountant. That was a lot of people. In fact, my first reaction was, am I high maintenance or what? Well, what I did with my list was find ways to make my life better. My income went up, my health got better, people noticed, they wanted to know what I was doing. I told them. And the result was my most recent book, The Network Sage, Realize Your Network Superpower. This is based on then a decade of research with hundreds of people ranging in age from 7 to 87. You're going to meet the 87-year-old in a little while. Altogether, I identified 7,000 different types of connections that we can have with one another. And I organized those into some networks that people find meaningful. Also allowed some flexibility for people, as you will see as we proceed. Now, the great thing about this, as it has been used and unfolded, is that this is valid across nations and across cultures. So particularly in the US, where a lot of us are working with, living with, engaging with, providing services for people from different cultures, what I'm talking about today is going to apply. That will make sense in just a few minutes. The other thing that I like is that if you are in the healthcare space, you know about the social determinants of health and how that is one of our current concerns within the health sector. Well, the good news about this framework I'm going to show you is that it's far more modifiable than the social determinants of health, which puts a lot of power in our hands as individual people, as families, and as those who provide services and working with people. Now, what has evolved is the book that is been delayed a bit, but is clearly in the works, called The SeniorSage, as Steve has just mentioned. Now, this came about because a number of people had read The Network Sage as they were contemplating retirement. And as they did, and they read it, they changed their plans. Some of them shared it with their parents who were already retired, really in this senior category. And but they said while they understood the book and they saw its value, it was written for working adults, which is true, it was. That was the audience that I had in mind, and seniors wanted their own. So as I wrote this next book, I thought about those seniors who either were contemplating or had relocated, their family and other caregivers, and in part because I know from my own experience that to the degree that as caregivers, if our networks are in good shape, it's going to be a lot easier for us to succeed well in that caregiving role. This is also shown to be valuable for people who are providing products and services to understand the needs of their populations better. And I am particularly keen on those people who do customer journey or patient experience sort of work, because it broadens our perspective about the whole person. Finally, and you'll understand why in a minute, I am very keen on policymakers and government planners understanding this because of where we are today. Now, these perspectives that I have come from what you see on this particular slide. I am a former senior government public health official appointed by a president. I formerly was also a business executive in a Fortune 50 corporation and a business owner and founder myself. In both of those roles, I've been an employer. I'm concerned about my employees. I'm an interdisciplinary social scientist by training, and I'm a senior myself, and I am a solo senior myself. So these issues are very near to my own life circumstances, and I've been a caregiver, as I just mentioned. Finally, I did not personally suffer a disaster, but my neighbors have, because a tornado touched down near me a year ago that left 1,000 families homeless. And I have been part of that recovery effort locally. So I've had a chance to see the impact of disasters like the hurricane we're currently watching on the lives of seniors. Now, what I want to say is that this is entirely new policy territory for us. We have never before in human history faced what we are facing right now. We have increasing numbers of people living longer and healthier, but at the same time, we don't have the traditional support systems in place to help them out. And worse, our planning methods are flawed. And by the way, and I mean at the personal level, the family level, the local community level, at our states and for our nations, and even for our globe overall. We're not doing a good enough job in understanding what we need to understand to plan for the future. I'm also concerned about the availability of senior care and when it is available for the cost. I'm also particularly concerned about our over-reliance on the healthcare system to pick up the slack. Steve, this is one of those citations that I'd like you to put in the chat. What we know from the research of Faggy and McGinnis is that only 10% of what determines our health is what the medical care system can do for us. So there's 90% of that variance unaccounted for, and much of that variance is something that we can do something about personally or within our communities, and so something we need to address. I'm concerned overall about the economic impact of all of this and our unpreparedness for disasters. Seniors and others who've got any particular disability or handicapping condition are particularly at risk in situations like that. And I am very concerned about our over-optimism that technology is going to fix this for us. Technology that enables human connection is something that I'm a big fan of, but technology will never replace what we as human beings give to one another. Now, all of that sounds pretty daunting, but I'm an optimist. And so I think and know that if you use these frameworks, it is possible to build networks. I've seen 7-year-olds do it. I also know that those who use the sort of operating system I'm going to show you do improve life, not just for themselves, but for other people. Now, this is not going to solve every problem, but it is going to fill some major gaps. And it may not be perfect, but I'll tell you, I learned in government that sometimes we allow the perfect to be the enemy of the good. If this is good, good enough is just good enough, and we can move forward from here. Now, by the way, I am not going to specifically talk about COVID, but once you see what I'm about to present, you're going to understand to a far greater degree about how COVID really did impact us in ways many people have still not recognized. Now, here's the biggest lesson I've learned. When you've got the right people in your life, it just works out better. Now, in part, that's because these people provide us with support. In part, it's because we provide them with support. That's the sort of mutuality that keeps us all going and enjoying life and fulfilling whatever our particular destinies might be. They also give us information, and that's important because being wired in to all kinds of sources of information is important as in a world like ours, which is moving so fast and increasingly more rapidly. Now, the good news is we are hardwired to connect. We've been doing it since the moment we were born, and some people suggest even before that. The bad news is we don't do it very well. We are not conscious about the connections that we are making. We're not aware of all of the people in our lives. This is, by the way, not a criticism of anybody. I wasn't either when I first started. Now, when I saw this particular study, I'd like to mention, I thought, my goodness, it's just like us in our connections. Harvard students were asked to draw Harvard Yard in about 3 minutes. What I'll tell you is that no student did it accurately. Where they focused, for example, the places where they socialized, be it a pub or their dorm, were larger. And where they weren't focused, like the library, was either small or it was left out altogether. And they totally forgot the non-student housing that rings the campus. Well, it's the same way with us. We focus selectively on the people that we are connecting with in the moment. But to make matters even worse, we lack an organizing framework. If you've got any record of your connections, it is probably alphabetized in your Outlook database or your cell phone. It's not provided for you in any kind of a framework. Well, that's what I'm going to do with you today. I'm going to show you 2 frameworks. Now, the first framework is the one that I call life networks. These are enduring. That means they don't come and go. They change, but they don't come and go. And the first 5 of these networks I call Birthright Networks because your parents built these for you. If you are a parent, you built these for your children. And I'm sure these all make sense to you. Now, you change these networks right from the time you're quite young, but you will never outgrow the things that these networks provide for you. Then you mature into 3 more networks that I call coming of age networks. You see those listed here, and they probably make sense except for Ghost. Now, I'll talk about Ghost in a minute, but first let me mention career. I am not going to talk about career network today because the person that I am profiling in the case study is a retiree. The people who she connected with in her career now are part of her social network, as they have remained friends since that time. Now, ghosts, who are ghosts? Ghosts are people who were in your life at one time, but who are no longer. When we reach the senior stage of our life, we actually have more ghosts in our lives than real people. I mean, can you imagine? Are you still in touch with your 3rd grade best friend? I've tried to find my college roommate and I can't. And ghosts, even though they are not physically present in our life, clearly had an impact on us. They left some sort of impression. Sometimes that impression was positive. I mean, for me, it was a grandfather. I don't remember really what he looks like, except for family photographs, because he passed away when I was about 4.5. But I will never forget how good it felt to sit in his lap. On the other hand, we have a category that I call hungry ghost. These were people who left us with a bruise and a hole in our heart. I call them hungry because we couldn't satisfy them then and we can't do it now. But guess what? We're still trying. Not with them, of course, because they're not here, but with people or in situations that remind us of them. And those of us who provide services to others and who interact with people of other races or other cultures really need to understand that sometimes the people we're dealing with have had a hungry ghost experience with somebody who looks like, talks like, or acts like we do. And sometimes their reaction to us is not about us. It's about that hungry ghost. I didn't go looking for these people, by the way, but they kept showing up in my research, which is why I had to kind of create a network for them. Now, the second type of network, so the second major part of this framework I'm presenting to you is what I call an event network. Now, you understand because you've had some of these yourself. People come into your life to help you. And then when the event is over, they pretty much leave. I mean, maybe you found a wedding photographer that you really liked, and that person then photographed your children and your family for every year's holiday card. But those people, chances are few and far between. I just want to point out this picture right here on the slide is the neighboring properties that I've been helping out with. As part of that disaster recovery effort that I mentioned. So on to the case study. Let's meet Janet. Now, I want you to know that Janet is a real person. Janet is not her name. We have changed her name. We have de-identified all of this. We never again use another name in the networks that you are going to see. We have omitted some information that might allow someone to find out who she is, protect her privacy. And I am using this information and telling the story with her permission. Now, when I met her, she was 87, a retired teacher who at that point had been widowed for about 20 years, very healthy, a very low user of healthcare. The only time she'd been hospitalized is when she gave birth to her 3 children. She was living independently at the time, and by the way, still is, in an over 55 community where she is an active community volunteer. And by that, I mean the community outside the gates of her gated over 55 community, the bigger, wider community. She works in a soup kitchen, runs it 1 day a week, working a 12-hour shift. She also volunteers to do reading in the local schools and at the local library with children. She's also a very helpful neighbor. Even in her late 80s, she is driving younger neighbors in their 60s and 70s to their appointments in the medical center several hours away. Very socially engaged, and she travels internationally, not alone, but with her adult children who do that in part for recreation and in part for their work. Now, here's the process that we used with her and frankly with anybody that we work with. The first step is to identify who are all of their connections now. With that in mind, we look at whether any important connections might be missing. Because of our research, we know that there are patterns, and in particular, where to look. And we also know, because of the sort of broad base of social and health sciences that we have, where people particularly need to pay attention to needs they may not even know they have. So we look for those unmet needs. Now, sometimes with the individual themselves, or in this case, along with her adult children, we built a plan to move forward. And then this is the do-it-yourself implementation process. Once we've developed a plan, we can follow up and we can advise over time. In particular with Janet, we have continued to do follow-up from this point. She is currently 94 years old. I do have an update of the our most recent contact with her. I am working on that now, and that's going to be available. Steve, if you'll put my email address in the chat, anybody who wants the updated version when I get it, I will provide that to them. Okay, so let's go through Janet's networks as a way of understanding what they all are. So the first one, and what you're going to see by, my mouse. What you're going to see is the way that we've arrayed these networks here in the dark green will always be the same. I always start with the family network, talk about all of the birthright networks, then the coming of age networks, and always in a clockwise direction so that that is standardized. So in my work, we've identified 4 different groups that you could have within your family of origin, the one you were born into. In Janet's case, everybody in her family of origin has since passed away. She is the last survivor of her generation. So all of her siblings and their spouses, her husband and all of her in-laws and their spouses are all gone right now. She's got 27 nieces and nephews left behind, and still a very small family of her own. Daughter and son are her biological children. She has one deceased son, and then 1 granddaughter and who's married, and 2 great-grandchildren. That's her family today. She does not have former family. Former family are the people who are in your life if you or your current spouse or life partner were ever partnered before or married before. Nor does she have people that I would call just like family. That means people who are not related to you by blood or marriage, but you think of them as family, you know? They come to all your family events. Maybe your children call them aunt or uncle. So they are just like family to you, and they are increasingly important in this world today. If somebody has pets that they view as a companion, then that goes in the family too. I mentioned that this framework was flexible. Let's imagine, for example, that someone had a dog, but was part of a search and rescue squad, and this was part of their job. Well, in that case, the dog is going to go in the career network more than in a family network, because it's not a companion animal. This is a working animal, and that's why it's in that person's life. Now, here are the specific challenges that I see when it comes to families, and I'm going to do this with every network. The family network is one of the most challenged when it comes to contemplating longevity for several reasons. First of all, family size. Families are half the size today that they were 50 years ago. And of course, 50 years ago, they were half the size that they were 50 years before that. So there are fewer family members on deck to be able to help. As a result of that, I could compare, for example, and I spoke to this group a couple of weeks ago, my own experience as a family caregiver for my grandmother, which was significantly different than the caregiving experience for my mother. Because with my grandmother, I had oodles of cousins and aunts and uncles to all help out, something that, as I described, my mother did not have. Now, the other thing too is disruptive family events. And here's what I mean by that. Divorce, remarriage, military deployment, incarceration, or increasingly grandparents raising grandchildren because of opioids. And then, as you know, we have a number of children who are COVID orphans now. When you think about the intact family, the nuclear, father knows best, leave it to Beaver family, that mom and dad and a couple of kids, that represents only 20% of families today in the United States. Let me say that again. Only 20% of families in the US today are once married couples with children. So if you are married with your first spouse and you have children, you are practically a unicorn. That is not the experience for most people in the United States today. Solo singles is something that, of course, this audience would know very well. And you would also know the older term for that, elder orphans, which many people don't like. In the book, I'm coining a new term called geographic orphans. That because 40% of adult Americans live an average 700 miles away from family. So that would be somebody like me. I am a solo single. I have family, but the closest one is about 1,000 miles away. So they're not here for any close by hands-on care. Of course, you would also in this audience understand sandwich and club sandwich caregiving. And then finally, women's employment. I mean, women are the traditional hands-on caregivers. And so even if you might have a family in nearby, chances are the women are in the workforce. Now for Janet, you'll see her son and daughter-in-law are color-coded bright blue, and that's to distinguish them from the rest of the family. They are the only family that are close by to her. Now let's move on to the Health and Vitality Network. In this network are the primary and specialty care professionals you might think about: doctors, dentists, vision care providers, mental health providers, and then all the forms of institutional care: hospitals, rehabilitation facilities, nursing homes, but also fitness and appearance go here as well. Now, a couple of challenges here. The access to care and the cost of care is well known. We don't need to talk about those. Care coordination, as we move into the later part of our life, becomes a major challenge. By the time most people in this country are 50, they have at least one chronic condition. And for every 3 years after that, they tend to acquire one more chronic condition. So when primary care is not capable of managing that, it requires multiple specialists, and the coordination can be quite daunting. The thing that I'm most concerned about as well are the things I will say next. We have undervalued fitness. We've underinvested in fitness. Given what comprises health, the best thing that we can do for ourselves is to stay as fit as we possibly can, regardless of any particular disability we may have, or disease condition we may have. Staying fit is what's going to keep us aging and living our later years well, but we've undervalued that. We've also undervalued appearance. People make instant judgments about us based on our appearance. And that to me plays heavily into issues of ageism. And Steve, if you put these citations in the chat for me, I tell people that if you can only read one book on aging, I suggest it be Counterclockwise by Ellen Langer, because she does the best job I know of describing what the potential of older people is, and also the damage that ageism wreaks on us as older people. I mentioned this happens in every one of our networks, by the way, but I'm mentioning it now in the context of our health network because it often happens there as physicians dismiss how we feel based on, oh, well, what do we expect? We're aging or we're older. While the geriatricians I talk to say there is no such thing as a disease of aging. There are diseases older people get, but and that's what we need to focus on. And then finally, I want to mention this because it's very, to me, extreme. And that is the sort of ageism in cancer care against people who are single. 87 studies have shown that when a person is single, physicians are less likely to recommend the most modern cancer therapies. And that is for two reasons. First of all, they believe they do not have support. And second, they believe that the single person lacks the will to live. Well, I will tell you the numbers don't bear that out. In fact, it's only married men who survive cancer better than single men. Single women actually have better survival rates than married women. And we have to think about this because once you're over 65, your chances of being diagnosed with cancer are 10 times greater than they were when you were under 65. And about 60% of all cancers are diagnosed in people who are over 65. So fighting back against that sort of ageism, watching it when it happens is very important. Now you're going to notice these people here in this sort of light orange color. What you're going to see here is a recommendation that we made to Janet. Normally what we do is we look at somebody's networks overall, and then we come back, we kind of get the big picture, almost as if we were helicoptering over their lives. Then we come back and we make our recommendations. And this, we don't have enough time for me to go through all of the steps that way. So I'm going to tell you what we recommended to her in this health network, which was this. You see, when we met Janet, she was recovering from a serious disease. It devastated her. That people thought she should go to assisted living. She didn't want to yet. So what we suggested is if she really wanted to continue to be independent, she was going to have to regain her strength and her fitness. So we recommended a trainer. She liked to walk in the water in the pool morning and night. So she found one person to go with her in the morning, another person to go with her at night, and she had two walking buddies. So that gave her both the exercise and the social contact. Otherwise, compared to most seniors, she has a pretty small health network because she's been very healthy. Okay. Now, the Education and Enrichment Network, this is the network, first of all, that got you ready for the work world. If you went to college, it extends to those years. It's also things you might do for adult education and your own enrichment, your hobbies, for example. Janet was an avid gardener, so she was very active in her community with the garden walk, and really liked discussion groups and information that was presented at a special Prestige 55 group that the local hospital runs. Now, here's some of the challenges in longevity. We have underappreciated the value, not so much, in my opinion, of the information and advice that people can get in their education and enrichment network, but for the social connections. And particularly for somebody who has been in the work world, where a lot of their career connections would be also be their social connections. When they leave and retire, they need to fill that gap with other ways to be social with people. And this is one of the ways to do it. The other is whether they're even available in your particular community and whether you can access them. Recently on one of the Facebook groups that I'm a member of with seniors, they have been complaining because a lot of these classes are at night and seniors are not going to drive. And while other people might chime in and say, oh, but yes, you can do this via Zoom, or there are Tai Chi classes that you can see on YouTube, the reality is, yes, you have the information, but you don't have the connections socially that you would otherwise have from people you would meet here in this situation. Now, in the spiritual network, I divide that into two different groups. Religious congregations, and whether you are a member or a leader in one of those, and then other things you do, sort of personal, spiritual nature. I mean, remember, all of this was built from data that hundreds of people gave me. So what I saw in here was this sort of divergence, is that pretty much regardless of whether people had a religious congregation that they were a part of, most people also did something that they personally felt was spiritual and enriching to their lives in that sense. Now, for some people, that was something like yoga or meditation, maybe with a group. Well, it was even things like going to the hospital and rocking the babies who were in intensive care. And they found that as a spiritual experience for themselves. I don't judge that. If that's what they think is spiritual, that's good for them to even recognize and build into their lives. Now, there's a couple of challenges here as we age. One is that religious congregations have declining membership. And that is particularly because younger people are no longer attending. Now that is leading, and I saw in my research, to some intergenerational conflicts. Older people are very concerned about their grandchildren. Do they even know what they're celebrating at a holiday? Do they understand that it's more than presents under a tree? Do they understand the nature of the celebration and the holiday and the rituals? And they feel a kind of an ache and a gap in that. The other thing too that challenges this network is when seniors relocate. I don't have a lot of data on this, but I do have some from my research, and saw that what happens to seniors overall, but where a lot of people pointed out to me is in the as they relocate, had they had children, they would have thought to find another congregational home of some sort, whether that be a synagogue or a church or a mosque. I mean, they would have thought about that. But when they did not have children in the household, it became the sort of last thing they got around to, if they got around to it at all. And then again, here we have underappreciated the value that a religious congregation and a spiritual home can have for people, especially when we go through important milestones and challenges in our lives. All right, now the social and community network. That's neighbors, friends, friends of friends, community volunteering, social media. And again, we've underappreciated the value of this group. We don't have a lot of places to go meet one another like we used to. We don't have town squares. If we have a farmer's market, maybe it's once a week. And these sorts of social connections are formed by repeated contacts over time. And before COVID, for example, if you ever went to the same coffee shop every morning, you know that because you started to see the same people and talk to the same baristas. And one of the things we now know, by the way, is to the degree that you did that and you were socially embedded in your community, that facilitates longevity. In fact, one researcher says it contributes more to your survival than does a flu shot in terms of what it does for you and your health. The other challenge here is mobility. We are the most mobile country in the world. And every time we move, we've got to reestablish all kinds of connections. That's easy if you've got a career and you've got connections in your workplace to launch you. It's also easy if you have children because children are incredible connectors. You've got to get them to school, and the school has sports, and then you meet other parents and you're off and running. There's another thing too, and this is a piece of advice to any relocating senior. Existing communities have existing cultures. If you were one of the first people to move into a community, Janet was, all of these people here that Janet knows here, they all, well, not all of them, some of these are our friends from out of state where she used to live, but all of these people were neighbors who all moved into this community at the same time. They created the culture. Anybody who comes in after that is going to have to adapt. That's one of the things a realtor may or may not be able to tell you is what really is the culture. What are the unspoken norms that you will have to abide by in these communities? Oops, once again, I'm at it with my mouse. Okay, now let me explain this. You see these light orange people? One of the things that we noticed was that Janet had a very good social network, as I've said, but we noticed it was small. So we suggested she join the singles club, which she did. And they started going to concerts and she started meeting people, which was a good thing because you see all of these dark orange, These were the very close, loving, helpful neighbors. Within about 6 months of doing this network map for Janet, they announced they were relocating to live near their adult children. So she lost 3/4 of her existing intimate network. And within several months, all but one of them passed away. And hence my comment about late life relocations, that going back to live with adult kids or near adult kids can be a very difficult move to make at this stage of life. So it was a good thing that Janet was already building an additional network. Okay, home and personal affairs network. That's things like your household, your investment property, if you have any, your legal and financial advisors, and all of your personal advisors. This is the network that is the most underdeveloped for every adult American that I have spoken with and worked with, for several reasons. Now, first of all, it's large. It takes a lot of people to have a house. And that is not appreciated by realtors and bankers who are helping people decide whether they can afford a house. It's not just the house, it's the workload to take care of it. This is also the place where we always look for missing connections because we find them. In this case, Janet had a will, but it had not been executed correctly. Her heirs could not have taken the will to probate. So we suggested that she really look at all that, get a new attorney. Her power of attorney was still being held by her deceased son. So that was a document that was not updated. And her healthcare power of attorney was a document that was given to her at one of those Prestige 55 seminars, which only gave her representative the authority to consent to a procedure, not to withdraw care, which is clearly what she wanted. Because she had gone through the extended comas and deaths of her brother and her husband before her. She did not want that for her family. But none of her documents would have empowered her heirs or her representative to do that. So it was a pretty fearful time for her for several months while she and her kids got all that worked out, but it eventually was. And in addition to those things I've already mentioned, the other thing that I would say is the legal and financial advisory services that work with older people, in my opinion, have not done a good enough job of really diving deeper into what people's real needs are in this regard, which means a lot of people are vulnerable. So I told you we met her at 87. She was just recovering from a serious illness. People wanted her to go to assisted living. Here's the change on her 90th birthday. You'll see just the very few changes that we suggested and what a difference it made. Everything was restored. She took her entire family on a cruise for her 90th birthday. That was a real splurge for her. They all enjoyed it. And it wasn't her first cruise, but it was the first time she went snorkeling on her 90th birthday with her 2 great-grandchildren. All right, just a few more things now. Let's talk about some events. If this is actual data from a friend of mine who is a physician who was in a hospital for 26 hours for a hip replacement. These were all of the people that he had to interact with during the course of his hospitalization. Now, by the way, these are only types of people, they're not numbers. So he would have been cared for by more than one nurse, for example. We're just recording the types here. This is important because of how complex some of these can be. This is also actual data. And Alan is an actual husband and Bonnie is his late wife. Alan and I collaborate on a story about the impact of her stage 4 metastatic breast cancer diagnosis. We've got a really number of amazing insights from his experience as a caregiver. And here in this slide, what I'm capturing is just what Alan had to manage in the hospital alone, just in the hospital, not at the doctor's office, not at home, not in the other community settings where Bonnie got care. And you will see the number of types of people that he had to connect with. Now, Alan's been in healthcare since the Vietnam era. He was a medic then. He said, I know who these people are. How does somebody do it when they don't? Well, that's a good question. And I think for those of us who care for others in a situation like that, we can do a whole lot better. This is what I mean about really understanding the experience of our patients or our customers as we deal with anyone of any age, and particularly when they're in the situation. Well, I've got just one more punchline to the story about Janet. At the age of 92, when we gave her a call to check up on and see how things were going, here's what we found. Now, you recall I have used this dark orange color in the past to represent a connection that would be lost. These were all of the connections that Janet lost when she had insomnia and her physician prescribed a benzodiazepine. The drug had side effects that made her drowsy. So she only had about 2 good hours the following day. When she complained about that to her physician, he said, well, then just take the pill earlier. Well, all that did was change when the 2 good hours happened. So, and as luck would have it, we happened in for an update. And when we heard about this and we saw the impact that it was having on her, here's what we saw. She lost half of her connections. And I just want to point out, this is where the fun stuff is. This is the stuff she enjoyed doing. She lost it all. I mean, she had already delegated her financial affairs to her son. He was close by and very handy. He could take care of the household. You know, they would make sure she got the care she needed, but she wasn't having any fun. She had to quit volunteering. She stopped driving her friends to their appointments. She needed care of herself, and she was hospitalized twice. Now, the other thing I want to point out is seniors provide $75 billion in volunteerism services a year. So it's, you know, and this is part of the ageism that other people report to me from research they have done in healthcare, that too many physicians say, oh, well, there's seniors that sit at home anyway. What does it matter? Well, it matters a lot. She's not having fun. Her mood's really going downhill. And I'm pleased to say, though, again, we suggested that they get a pharmacy consult, find out if there was a different medication she could take. There was. Doctor refused to prescribe it. So her adult children found another doctor and got that taken care of, and just in time, because that's when COVID hit. And so she was, I think, better able to navigate COVID than she did before. Now she's 94 now, and I think COVID did have an impact on her because of the social connections she lost during that time. So she's probably going to be transitioning to senior care at some point in the future. But at least as she does, she'll be much more satisfied that she went reclaiming the life that she had wanted to live. So that is the final of my remarks. And now, Steve.
Wow. Well, I hope the audience has as deep of an appreciation. The maps, I think that's what you call them, just mind blowing. And it really, Glenna ran me through the process to create one of those maps, and it only takes, I guess it was about an hour that you did Q&A. And when you can graphically see your network, number one, you realize that the network that I love the one with the hospital, because when you're thrown into a healthcare setting, this network that just instantly pops up around you is kind of scary. But when you're thinking in the future, I think very few of us have ever sort of written down our network and actually studied it and looked at it and reviewed the strengths and the weaknesses of it.
You know, Stephen, I hadn't either. And before I started on this, you know, I credit Robert Downey Jr. When he talked about pit crews, that got me going. And you don't have to be much of a race car fan to know that races can be won or lost in the pit. So to the degree that we have a good network of people, there is so much better a life that we can have. Now, I've really only talked about the surface levels of this. I mean, there are many other things that we could do with this, like scenarios. I mean, at one of our updates, Janet was considering relocating back to where she had had her career and raised her children because she had so many friends there. But when you sit with her and you show her her map, which is what we suggested her adult children do with her, you could then start to see all of the people she was going to have to replace when she moved. That's part of why I got pulled into thinking about this for seniors, is that people who are thinking about retirement and planning to relocate to someplace, you know, at an over 55 community to play golf, realize what they would have to replace.
Yeah.
And they decided that it would, the better alternative was just go down and rent a condo for a month.
Yeah.
You
I've had
know?
several conversations like that recently. I, yeah, I mean, there was an interesting conversation I had with a woman who relocated from Minnesota to Florida because she was tired of the cold weather. But when she got down to Florida, she realized it was harder for her to create or replicate the network that she had created in Minnesota. But my gut level feeling is, because we all do this just on the fly, like none of us really map this out and set goals for, oh, I could use somebody to share my passion for collecting Beanie Babies with. You're just doing it kind of randomly. But if you map it out and you strategically plan it out, you'll probably have more success.
You definitely, and here's another thing. Another part of the next steps here is then we recommend that people get the names and the contact information for all of those on their map, and that they share that information with some important person who needs to know, or at least tell them where to find it. So, for example, I could open up my cell phone and give it to you. You could not find my mother, my brother, my doctor, my best friend. And so what if you needed to step in and help me with something? You couldn't do that. Even couples divide workload. So, you know, in the SeniorSage book, I tell the story about a young woman who died, leaving her husband with small children. He did not know the name of the pediatrician.
Mm-hmm.
Or here's the story of the widow gentleman that I mentioned. When we were doing his map, he pointed out that he had just had an experience with his kids. They were all out of his wife had been gone for 5 years. It was a holiday, and his daughter brought the entire family together at her place. They live in multiple states, so of course that was travel for everyone. And he said it wasn't until he heard his son say to his daughter, "Thank you for getting us all together," that it had been 5 years since the family had all been together. He said, you know, when my wife was alive, we would go away to the shore for a week, the entire family. He said, I paid for it, and I'm gladly so. But he said it was my wife who did the work. She's the one who made the effort. And without her around, I totally lost track of time and the fact that I had not seen my whole family together in 5 years. Yeah.
Great. Okay, I'm looking at the clock. We're at the top of the hour, reminding everybody this is recorded, but we've got a few questions here. First off, Vivian, I totally agree with you. She says, what a great way to present this info. I'm a visual learner, so it's really helpful. I totally agree that the mapping really helps. Okay. Someone asks, can Glenna be contracted to do personal maps, or do interested parties sign up for a research study?
I'm not currently conducting any more research. I am available as a consultant to an individual or a family to do this kind of work. I've not formally launched, but I will be by the end of October. So you have my email address. If anybody's interested, they can just be in contact with me.
Great. And yeah, you want to get in on the ground level here with Glenna. And then somebody says, I don't see financial planner on the list. A financial planner would be top of her estate planning documents, insurance, Medicare coverage, charitable planning, downsizing, what have you.
You're right. And that's because she no longer has a person like that in her life. She did it in the past, but now her son has taken over that role, and he is very financially literate, so able to fill that role for her. But if you were to see our entire architecture and the questions that we ask, that is one of the important items that we cover with people.
Great. Let's see. Well, Elizabeth Green dropped something into the chat about an RFP on regenerative medicine. I think that's just to share with the audience. You didn't bring, I don't remember you saying anything about that.
No.
Oh,
Let me though comment on one other thing, Steve, because I mentioned that we see patterns and we use other literature to inform the advice that we give people. With adults, we always look hard at that personal affairs network where the financial and legal planners are.
mhm.
And in part, that's because we know that 70% of adult Americans do not have an up-to-date will. So either that means they don't have a lawyer, or they don't have a right lawyer, or they don't have a financial planner, or they don't have a right financial planner. And that's a hole absolutely that they need to plug, and particularly if they have children. And those are minor children who need to be cared for with some sort of guardianship arrangement.
Yeah, the person did say not too financially literate if he didn't review the estate planning documents. Most people don't have time to do it correctly. So I hear this regularly. And I'll tell you, one of the main benefits of doing this and mapping this out is the amount of conversations that I have with adult children who mom and or dad have taken a turn for the worst health wise. They're coming in and they're trying to figure out where everything is. Most, like, I can tell you, and it's no affront to my mom or dad, but I couldn't get in touch with their friends if my life depended on it. It's there's real value in all of us having this mapped out. And I think if we do it across the generations, there's different reasons for us doing this, maybe more professionally as we are younger, and as we grow older, then it becomes less of this sort of, oh, I have to do this because I'm growing old and I might need help. It's more, wow, this network carries me through all life's journeys.
It absolutely does. And the other thing that I like about it is how empowering it is. And we've seen that, as I said, even in our youngest research participant who was 7 years old. This gives people data that they don't have and that they can't get any other way. And by the way, about what most of us would say is our most interesting subject, which is us. And so the opportunities are really endless in terms of optimizing your life and doing it better, living it better, but particularly if you need help. Parents whose children have food allergies, for example, except for COVID, the bulk of a child's waking hours, they're not with a parent. That means the parent's got to rely on other people. Well, how are they going to do that if they don't even know who all those people are? And what I also know is that by the time a kid is 6, they've got about 150 connections. So that's a lot of people, and a lot of opportunity to either get help or to be vulnerable at a time when you need help, but even don't know where to turn for it, which is probably the biggest thing I would say, is that probably the principal takeaway that everyone has is, oh my heavens, I had no idea I had so much support. I had no idea there were so many people that I could turn to if I've got a particular need. And that's the first step, is becoming aware of who those people are.
All right. And let's see. Let's see. Mina asks, where is Glenna located for engagement with the speaking opportunity?
I am currently located in the Philadelphia area. I travel a lot between Philly and Washington, where I used to live. So I'm on this Northeast corridor quite a lot. And then, of course, with Zoom today, I'm much more accessible than ever.
Okay, and then okay. And the last comment, if folks in the audience can help Elizabeth with collaborating on access to regenerative medicine, feel free to reach out with her there in the chat. And I think that does it. This other question is related to something else that I'll handle. Glenna, this was amazing. It really was. And I think we've got to scream this from the rooftops. This is a new way of thinking, and it addresses so many of the concerns that we talk about here, whether it be aging in place, taking care of a loved one, planning for our future. I feel like this is one spoke in the wheel that is really missing, is to document and map out our network so that we can improve it or celebrate it or what have you. And my friend
As
Deb
you can
Merrimer,
tell, I absolutely agree, Steve.
yeah, and Deb Merrimer, she agrees too. This has given us so much to think about for our clients and ourselves. Thank you so much. I agree. Like, you could see where, let's say, for whether it be a senior community or a home care agency, to be able to map this out, the value that could add to the family and to the caregivers and to the individual who might be more isolated now at home, and we need to reach out to that network. And okay, all right. Well, thanks so much, and we will see everybody in October.
Thank you, Steve.
You bet.